It is great to be here and to see everyone this morning. We are looking, Lord willing, once each month at a theme of valleys of life. Life has its valleys for sure. And the thing about valleys is they're unavoidable as we go through life. There are going to be times when we go through valleys, whether we want to or not. There are just certain times, just like geographically speaking, there are some times you just really can't get around a valley. You just got to go through it. And so it is with life. I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think of an example. And in fact, I was thinking there might have been one in Costa Rica, so I had asked Brother Hayner. He said he couldn't really think of an example there, but he mentioned to me, and I didn't realize this, and did some research, and sure enough, Machu Picchu in Peru. It's kind of on a mountain, and you can even go higher than that. It's an ancient Incan site. Seems to have been a town for royalty or something like that, but to get there, you have to go through this sacred valley is what they call it. And particularly there's a little small town called Aguas Calientes, the hot springs, literally hot waters. But there are hot springs there. And that's, if you go to Machu Picchu, that's where you will, sometimes you'll stay. Sometimes you stay in Cusco, is another town that's a little further off. But even if you don't stay in Aguas Calientes, you're going to go through there. That's just the route up to Machu Picchu. And I was even thinking about this and thinking, there are valleys in life you just absolutely cannot go around. And I was sort of messing around with the little chat GPT, and I typed in at one point, I said, look, I want to go to Machu Picchu, but I don't want to go through the valley. How should I go? And chat GPT responds and says, that's going to be difficult. And if you say in my life, I want to go to the mountaintop, but I don't want to go through any valleys. Well, God's going to respond. He's going to say, that's going to be a little difficult, because that's how this life is. You live in a fallen world. But valleys are not all bad. They're not always just nothing but bad. In fact, pictured here is the Sequatchie Valley, a view of the Sequatchie Valley in the Chattanooga area of Tennessee. And there are several spots as you're going over the mountain toward the valley that you can stop and look, and you can get a view, and people have stopped there and taken pictures. It is one of the most beautiful places on this earth, I'm convinced. Every time I go over that way, especially if I go over into the valley in Dunlap and that area, it is just never ceases to amaze me, the beauty of God's creation in that area. Valleys can be very beautiful. In fact, Billy Graham is credited with saying this: mountaintops are for views and inspiration, but fruit is grown in the valleys. That's very true as we go through life. Several years ago, I think I was just in junior high. We had to do a report on some political figure or whatever. Well, mine was, I don't remember if I chose him or if I was assigned to this person, but my report was on Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon had, he had some detractors, and certainly he was not perfect as a president or as a person, but he went through some very difficult times politically. In fact, at one point said he was just quitting politics, never was going to have no more involvement with it whatsoever. And he got back in it, of course, and ends up going on to be elected to the highest office, you could argue the highest office in the world. And so one of the quotes that stood out to me, and I've just never forgotten it, and it went into my research paper, and it went into my mind because, like I said, I've never forgotten it. But he said this: only if you have been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain. There is so much truth in that. Another fella said, you don't have to be on top of the mountain to be close to God. Sometimes you find him more clearly in the valleys. Life's valleys are unavoidable. We're going to pass through them from time to time. Most months we'll look at a particular valley and learn some lessons from that. Today we want to look at valleys in general and notice that they're not all bad. Are there negative aspects? Of course. But there are also very much so positive aspects as well. Let's look at the negative aspects first, and we'll end on a positive note. Negatively speaking, when we talk about life's valleys, well, listen, they're valleys. And there are different kinds of valleys, varieties of valleys as we go through life. But valleys are valleys. Well, there's a reason we call them valleys, because they are low points. They're low points geographically, but we use that metaphor to talk about a valley in life because it's kind of a low point. Some are lower than others, sure. But regardless, it's a valley. Either way, recognize God. That He is right there in the valley as much as He is there on the mountaintop, and stay close to Him. I'll reference Job a few different times. I debated on just kind of parking in the book of Job and almost just preaching from that, but verses 20 through 22 of chapter 1, after Job loses everything, all he has at this point is his health, and that's not for long, of course. But it says, verse 20, then Job arose and rent his mantle. He tore his clothing out of grief, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshiped. Job staying with God even in this deep, dark valley that he's going through. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Now, Job was mistaken. We know this. We're looking at it in hindsight. Job didn't realize he's thinking in terms of, well, God gave and now God's taken away. It really wasn't God that had taken away. It was Satan. God had permitted this to prove to Satan that Job will serve me faithfully in the valleys just the same as he will on the mountaintops. Job thinks this is God. It may also be that this is just a Hebrew figure of speech. Many times in the Hebrew language and in that culture, they would attribute things to God that he had allowed, not necessarily meaning God actively did that. So it could be either one, maybe a little bit of both. But did you catch that last phrase? I didn't read it yet, but I wanted to emphasize it. That last phrase of verse 21, he says, blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, his wife's going to come along later, and she's going to encourage him to say, cursed be the name of the Lord. Just curse God and die, Job. But Job says, God's right here in the valley the same as he is on the mountaintop. God's with me when life is terrible, the same as he is when life is great, if I stay with him. And it says in verse 22, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So, look, valleys are valleys. Regardless of what specific kind or variety, it's a valley. But stay with God. Stay close to Him. Understand also, when we think about this in negative terms, that some valleys are deeper than others. I put the picture here that you see, and I don't know what these other pictures are. I picked that one particular of the Sequatchie Valley because I love that area. It is so beautiful. But this is you can tell that's a pretty deep valley there. Some valleys are deeper than others. You don't believe that, you could ask old Job. In fact, going back to Job chapter 1, it begins in verse 13. After God has had this conversation with Satan, all that he hath is in thy power, verse 12. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan immediately goes out. And there's a day when Job's children are together there, verse 13. There comes a messenger to Job. It says, oxen were plowing, donkeys feeding beside them, Sabaeans fell upon them, took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While that guy's speaking, another person comes. Fire of God's fallen from heaven, burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another. Chaldeans made out 3 bands, fell upon the camels, have carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Oh, but we're not done yet. While he was yet speaking, here comes another. Sons and daughters eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. One thing after another. And how ironic that Satan, who's permitted to do this, God is proving that Job is faithful in the valleys the same as he is in the mountains. He's not perfect, but he's faithful. How ironic that Satan leaves one person each time so that there's somebody to go and tell. And I don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us for sure, but it may very well be that Satan knew exactly what he was doing with the timing of this. That while one guy is still in the midst of delivering bad news, another one shows up and says, "You're not going to believe this." Look, some valleys, they're deeper than others. Some valleys are, they're frustrating, but they're clearly minor. They're not as deep a valley. Others feel like they're so deep, it's just impassable. Sometimes you have a minor frustration. Sometimes you have something that literally is life-altering, life-changing. Some valleys are deeper than others, but some valleys are, some valleys are longer than others. Some are deeper than others. Some are longer, though, than others. In fact, what we mean by that is some may be only just a short time. You may go through a valley that's a bad day. Still a valley. It's not pleasant, is it? But it's a day. You could, some of the folks who are teachers, you might have that one particular class part of the day that, or maybe you're in a situation where you're not in the best job, and it could be those 8 hours of that day. But sometimes I've taught teachers before, and they say, "Boy, I got this one class. The rest of my day is not that bad, but this one class, they don't seem to pay attention as well. Maybe they misbehave more. And that 1 hour of the day, it's just tough every day." But that's a valley. I mean, it may only be for an hour. Maybe it'll just be for 8 hours of the day, but that's a valley. And those valleys may be deeper, maybe more shallow, but they're shorter. But you know where we're going with this. Some valleys feel endless. I mean, they feel like they just go on forever. And you look at Job 2:13. Job suffered at least 7 days because his friends sat there with him for 7 days and 7 nights without speaking. So it was at least 7 days. I submit to you, probably, almost certainly, much longer than that. Some valleys are longer than others. You may have a bad day, but then you may sometimes have a bad month, week. Some folks sometimes even look back and they'll say, "Well, this past year, or I remember that one year, that was a bad year." And even looking back and having some perspective of hindsight, say that was a bad year. Some are longer, deeper than others. But we could also say some valleys are more fertile than others. Some valleys are more fertile than others. Some valleys will allow you to enjoy other things in life. Look, if you got that bad class every day, and you may dread that, or even maybe that job, and that's, I don't like that. It could be that there are temptations there. It could be just a toxic work environment or whatever. But I look forward to going home, being with my family, and that's a refuge. Look forward to getting together with friends, brethren, whatever. Some valleys will allow us to enjoy other things in life. That teacher that has the one bad period may say, "You know what, but the other periods that I have with those, I got some good students, very, very hardworking, very diligent, very well behaved, and that makes up for it." Some valleys are like that. You can enjoy other things in life, but some valleys, as you know, are absolutely consuming. And it's like a barren wasteland. You see the valley here in this picture. There's some growth there, but not nearly like some of those lush valleys you saw in the other picture. Some valleys are kind of like a barren wasteland. You know, Job's suffering left him feeling so like he was in such a barren wasteland of a valley, figuratively speaking, that he says in chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, he wished he'd never been born. He cursed his day. This is not a man, saying, I'm going to commit suicide or something like that. He's just in that deep of a valley, and it's consumed him. He's lost everything, literally. And now he's lost his health as well. And he says, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. I wish I'd never been born, he said. Valleys they're valleys. Oh yeah, some are deeper than others, some are longer than others, some are more fertile than others. And sometimes life hits you with a perfect storm of a valley that seems it's so deep, it's like there's no sun can even get through, and you're just walking in darkness. And some valleys are not only like that, but they just seem like they go on forever. And not only that, they feel like they just consume you, and you are almost paralyzed in your life. Valleys can be tough, but there are positive aspects of valleys as well. Think about this. In the valleys, we grow. Again, I mentioned that quote where, mountaintops are for views and inspiration, but fruit is grown in the valleys. It was in 2020, I looked it up just to be sure I had it right, when I believe, I didn't put it in there, so I guess it was Joyce that put this in our bulletin, but it's a great poem. It's called It's in the Valleys I Grow by Jane Eggleston. It was written in 1977. Sometimes life seems hard to bear, full of sorrow, trouble, and woe. It's then I have to remember that it's in the valleys I grow. If I always stayed on the mountaintop and never experienced pain, I would never appreciate God's love and would be living in vain. I have so much to learn and my growth is very slow. Sometimes I need the mountaintops, but it's in the valleys I grow. I do not always understand why things happen as they do, but I am very sure of one thing: my Lord will see me through. My little valleys are nothing when I picture Christ on the cross. He went through the valley of death. His victory was Satan's loss. Forgive me, Lord, for complaining when I'm feeling so very low. Just give me a gentle reminder that it's in the valleys I grow. Continue to strengthen me, Lord, and use my life each day to share your love with others and help them find their way. Thank you for valleys, Lord, for this one thing I know: the mountaintops are glorious, but it's in the valleys I grow. It's in the valleys that we grow. And we could say we grow in wisdom, experience, resilience. And that's why James says to count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials or temptations, as the King James says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, endurance. He says, let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect, mature, entire, wanting nothing, or we might say lacking nothing. In the valleys, we grow in wisdom, we grow in experience, we grow in resilience, we grow in gratitude. As Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. I'll never forget, I cannot remember the fellow's name, Jones, Sam Jones. He spoke at the marriage retreat several years ago when some of us went. He held a meeting over in Oxford several years back, and it wasn't long after he had lost his wife. I believe she had a battle with cancer. And he talked about this verse, 1 Thessalonians 5:18. And he said, it's like he just kept coming back to that in his studies after her passing. And he said, I couldn't get around that phrase. In everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And he said, even in the lowest of times, and he admitted he was really struggling and grieving and depressed, but he said, that helped me I could be grateful for the time I had with her. I could be grateful for, other opportunities that came in that, because he said, her passing, and as she got down toward the end of her life, she reached out to some people that she knew were not right with the Lord, and it had opened some doors. And he said, there are things that you can be thankful for even in the midst of what seems like the darkest time in your life. And he talked about how that helped him. Well, we can grow in the valleys in gratitude. We can also grow in faith. 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7, Peter says, he's writing to persecuted Christians. In fact, we talked about 1 Peter before, kind of faith under fire, sort of the theme. He says, wherein you greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, you are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. He says, your faith's being tested. But precious metals, when they go through the fire, they're not destroyed. They're purified. And oh, how I love Job 23:10. It might be my favorite verse in this entire book, because Job says, even in the midst of such tremendous suffering, bless his heart, Job thinks God has done this. His friends are telling him, essentially, Job, repent, so God will ease up on you. And Job says, he knoweth, God, in other words, God knows the way that I take. And when he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. Job says, I don't understand what's going on. I know I'm not perfect, but I know I haven't done something so huge that God has just thrown this burden of suffering upon me. He thinks God's done it, and he says, I don't know why God's doing this to me, but I know this. On the other side, I'll come out like gold, purified 7 times. I'm going to be better because of this. I'm going to grow. And don't you know he did? It's in the valleys we grow. We could also say it's in the valleys we glow. We glow in good works. Let your light so shine before men, Jesus says, Matthew 5:16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. It's not they see us and say, boy, what a great person that guy is or that lady is. But they see you handling. How do you handle the valleys? How do you handle the adversity? And don't you know? I mean, even since becoming a Christian, I've been a Christian for years, and I sometimes still see someone handling adversity, handling a valley in their life, sometimes especially one of those deep, long, barren wasteland valleys. And I see how they handle it, and I say, man, I want to be like that. Not even thinking in terms just of that person, but I want to have that kind of faith, trust in God, resilience. And don't think the world doesn't see it too. And sometimes they say, what's it like to have a father who's going to give you that kind of resilience, that kind of ability to hold up under trials and difficulties? We can glow in good works, and Jesus says, when the world sees it, it'll glorify your Father. And make no mistake, many times it may help lead others to the Lord. We glow in good works. We glow in glorifying the Lord. Again, Job, he says, he didn't know, but he says God's given, God's taken away, but what does he say? Blessed, glorified be the name of the Lord. Think about this. The very hosts of heaven and hell are watching Job. All eyes are on him as he's going through this valley, this unbelievable valley. And the hosts of heaven and hell are watching to see how does he respond. No pressure, Job. It's a good thing he didn't know. I don't know. Looking at Job and his character, he might have been fine anyway. But Job didn't know that, but they were. Satan and all of his servants, all his angels, they're watching and just sort of just like, ooh, I'm just waiting. It's just a matter of time before he curses God. And I've even got his so-called friends, and they're accusing him. It's just a matter of time. And you can almost picture the angels of heaven sitting there. Angels are spirit beings, but to use anthropomorphism, they're almost, as it were, biting their nails. Oh, Job, don't give in. Oh, and they watch his wife come and say, do you retain your integrity? Curse God and die. And they're kind of going, no, don't do it, Job. The hosts of heaven and hell are watching him to see. I don't know who all in the spirit world might be watching me or you as we go through our valleys. We can glorify God in those valleys, and make no mistake, that is a positive aspect, even in the valleys. In the valleys we grow, in the valleys we glow, and we could also say it's in the valleys that we know. We know some things even in these valleys. We can know that valleys are temporary. Paul says so, 2 Corinthians 4:17 and 18. Our light affliction, he says. Go read 2 Corinthians 4 sometime and see what afflictions Paul describes. I don't think if Chad were writing that, I know if Chad were writing that, I wouldn't describe those as light afflictions. But he's putting it in perspective. And he says, our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Of course, he goes on in chapter 5 to talk about a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, and that's our home. When our earthly house of this tabernacle is dissolved, we got that home in heaven. Valleys are temporary. Hey, listen, when you're in a valley, remember this. It's a little bit of a play on words. 452 times. I counted using the King James Version. 452 times in the King James Version of the Bible, you will find the phrase, it came to pass. Now, I say that to play on words because sometimes it's just sort of using that as a lead-in. And I realize that, and I'm not trying to use that out of context. But I'm just saying that sometimes, somebody told me that years ago, said, hey, remember this? And they were sort of using it tongue-in-cheek as well. But it is encouraging to know that whatever it is, it's come and it will pass. Some valleys are deeper, some valleys are longer, but they're all temporary. If I stay with God, they're all just temporary. In the valleys, we know not only that they're temporary, we know that they are great teachers. Oh, the valleys are such great teachers. In every valley, you see, there are trials to face, of course, but there are also lessons to learn. There is also strength to be gained in those valleys. You know, the valleys, they make us better or bitter. Joshua 19, verses 14 and 27 mentions this valley, and I may butcher the pronunciation, but it looks something in English like Jephthahel, the valley of Jephthahel. You know what it means? It literally means the valley of God will open. I don't know exactly why they named it that, but I was thinking about this, and especially I wish I had time to go through a lot of these different valleys, so many of them that there is significance in their names. There's Valley of Salt that was mentioned a number of times in the Old Testament. Salt meaning, the Hebrew word meaning powder or salt, something dissolvable, fine, granulated type something. But it comes from a root word that means to pulverize. Sometimes your valleys feel like the Valley of Salt, don't they? But here, this Valley of Jephthahel, God will open. I learned from that God leads us through the valleys, and He will even open doors of opportunity for growth, for strengthening, for blessing. Because you see, valleys make us better or bitter. There's a door opened, though, to make them better, or to make me better as a result of that valley. But I've got to go through the door. You know, you can open the door for somebody, but if they don't go through, what good is an open door? But God will open doors even in the valleys. I've just got to take advantage of that. So valleys are great teachers. But we also know in the valleys that God is with me. God is with me. You know Psalm 23:4. In fact, we just sang it before the sermon. Didn't even plan it that way. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why would the psalmist say that? Well, he goes on to say, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Even in the darkest, deepest, longest, most barren valley of my life, God's with me. And he will be there with me. He will never leave me nor forsake me. Hebrews 13:5-6. So I know God is with me. I know God is faithful. He is faithful to supply my needs. That's Paul's point in Philippians 4:19. My God shall supply all your needs. He is faithful to bring me through life's valleys. What did Jesus say, John 14:1-6 to his apostles there? You believe in God, believe also in me. Or he starts off and says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Whither I go, you know, and the way you know. Of course, Thomas is going to say, Lord, we know not whither thou goest. How can we know the way? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He says, you stay with me. I'll bring you through every single valley of this life. He'll even turn them into blessings. 2 Chronicles 20, verse 26, another one of those valleys. This is the valley of Barakah. It means valley of blessing. It was there where there was a number of Confederate armies that joined together to fight against Jehoshaphat. You may recall this because it was a Sunday night a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago now, a couple of months maybe, that we studied this because Jehoshaphat, instead of going to somebody else for help, he prays to God. This beautiful prayer that we read about in 2 Chronicles 20, and he asked God for help. And God turned what was sure defeat, Jehoshaphat's not just facing one army. Any of those armies probably would have defeated him by himself. And God turned sure defeat into blessing, prosperity. God can still do that with the valleys of our lives. Do you know something? In Joel 3, verses 2 and 12, we read about a valley called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And it may very well be that it's, most scholars think it's the same as that Valley of Barakah, that after that it kind of became known as Valley of Jehoshaphat because of this great miracle God worked there. But here's the thing. God is faithful. He's going to bring us through life's valleys, but he's not going to save us from the valleys necessarily, but in those valleys. He saves us in the valleys. You know, sometimes we say, well, if God's going to save me, he'll just get me around every valley, just transport me over them. No, he's still with us in the valley, and he saves us in the valley, but not from the valley. Again, valleys are going to come in our lives, and they're not pleasant. You don't need me to tell you that, but they do have potential blessings in them. There are negative aspects for sure, but there are also positive aspects. We've got to remember that growth occurs in the valleys, and if I stay with God, he'll take me to the mountaintop, to the ultimate mountaintop, heaven itself. But as we close out, I want to close with a thought from Joseph. We finished our overview of Genesis last Sunday night. Joseph, when he gets to Egypt and he's basically made second in command, he gets married. And he has 2 children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, Manasseh and Ephraim in that order. And it's interesting because Joseph has taken a long valley to get to where he is when he's made second in command by Pharaoh. But he has this firstborn son, Manasseh. And you know what Manasseh means? When you look up the meaning of Manasseh, it means forgetting. Genesis 41:51. For God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil. He named his son Forgetting because God has blessed me so. I've forgotten all those troubles of the valley I've come through. But he has another son, and he names him Ephraim. Ephraim means fruitful. For, Joseph says, God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Mountaintops are great for the view, but fruit is born in the valley. What about us this morning? You may be in a valley, but stay with God. He'll be with us in the valley if we stay with Him. And maybe you're not His child and you need to be His child so that He will be with you in the valleys, the highs and the lows of life. If you're not His child, I'm happy to tell you it's a simple process. If you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you're willing to surrender your will to His in repentance, to stand before others and confess, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, then you can be baptized into Christ. We die to sin, bury that old man in a watery grave, and we're raised up to walk in newness of life, as Paul says, Romans 6:3 and 4. And then God says to you, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You stay with me, and I'm with you always. But folks, go with God through your valleys. He'll see you through to the mountaintop. Jesus says in John 16:33, in the world you'll have tribulation. But what does He say next? Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Can I paraphrase that just a little bit? In the valleys, you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer, because I can bring you to the mountaintop. Can we help you in some way? If so, come while we stand and sing to encourage you.